All right, Lee. I know we've done this before, and like you're a big time name in the United States, but still, can you introduce yourself for the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me again, Eric. I always enjoy our conversation. But yeah, basically a coach of many years. I started out as a physical education teacher, which was now that I'm older, I realize what a wonderful foundation that was for allowing me to be a better strength and conditioning coach because I learned management much better of large groups and writing out plans and stuff. It was really good. And then from that point, I kind of transitioned for a while into the strength and conditioning world performance, and went back into phys ed for a little bit. And but the whole time since the early '90s, I've been in strength and conditioning. Started out had several facilities, but then got more into consulting. So spend a decent amount of time traveling around different parts of the world, and certainly a lot in the United States, and work with different organizations and colleges and pro teams and high school teams and private facilities, and just kind of teaching my methods and my techniques. So it's been great. It's been fun.
Cool. So I know like some people call you the speed guy, and like you're like really good at analyzing how people move, or really good at like movement. But before we dive into like movement, I want to ask you something that's like really bothering me recently is like people always talk about biomechanic. So so I look up biomechanic. I like look into like different books of biomechanics, and I'm not gonna say all, but most of them
Right.
have like all those equations, all those like numbers.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't figure that out. Understand like the the English, but comes to like numbers, equation, I just don't get it. So
Yeah.
what exactly like is the overall whole concept is of biomechanic? Why can't it be like simple, like movement is just movement?
You know, I agree with you to the extent of 90% of us coaches, that's what we need to know is the basic understanding. Now, if you're going to be a professor or a teacher of biomechanics and you're going to carry the lineage of what biomechanics means and, dive deep into the rabbit hole of the numbers and stuff, that's fine. But you're right. For me, that's why I think over the years, what's helped me be able to relate to a lot of other coaches and athletes is I try to just keep it very simple. And again, that's my teaching background. Anything we teach isn't any good unless the learners can learn it, right? So I try to make it very user friendly, and I think biomechanics sometimes can be a little bit confusing. And basically, it's just about efficient movement. How do we move our trunk, and how do we use our limbs, our legs, and our arms to help us move from one space to another space to accomplish a task. And, we understand if we can take the biomechanics and understand how those positions help us create more force or quicker force, then we kind of solve most of our puzzles, of movement. And just keep it simple. If I'm trying to accelerate, Eric, so if I'm taking off from a standstill, my biomechanics will be like my limb actions will be longer because of force production. But once I get up to top speed, they want to be shorter when they travel from the back to the front because it makes it quicker and it allows me to stay coordinated. So I think if we can just understand it that way, that's half the battle right there.
Yeah, like it. So, um, I think it's like 2 years ago or 2.5 years ago, we were talking about like seven movement patterns,
Yeah.
and um, that really like after that discussion, I really saw a lot like coaches do combine prep to implement the seven movement patterns. So can you like walk us through like what exactly is the seven movement patterns
Yeah.
again?
Yeah, so I think anything we do in athletics, we have foundational skills that are important that help us. So I spend a lot of time working with field and court sport athletes. I work with track athletes, but track doesn't have a lot of lateral movement. It doesn't have a lot of, so when I talk about seven patterns, it's taking just a human being, a young athlete, young human being, and making them as efficient as possible in all directions of movement. So the seven patterns, the first two are straight ahead, and one of them would be acceleration. So that's getting us started. And then once we get up to speed, then we start sprinting. So if we can master just the simple movement mechanics of accelerating and then sprinting, then we can start adding variation to meet different sports. Then if we start moving laterally, we have a lateral shuffle, and like a basketball player playing defense is a good example of that. Or a fencer, right? A fencer does a lot of lateral, that kind of lateral gait. And then we have what we call a lateral run, which is kind of a combination of the shuffle with the ladder, with running. Yeah, and your upper body kind of stays sideways as you're moving. And then we start moving backwards. Now we have a back pedal, and there's many variations of a back pedal. And then we have what we call a hip turn. And Eric, the hip turn is what initiates me retreating back. So I can hip turn, and then all of a sudden I could shuffle, I could laterally run, I could sprint, I could take off or accelerate. And then the last one would be a jump. And we have tons of different kinds of jumps. We can obviously jump, we can leap, we can hop, we can do them in all directions. But if you do the basics of all of those, man, what a great foundation to now initiate sport specific patterns that are going to help us. But if you don't have that foundation, you're in trouble. You're just not going to ever really gain the optimal level of movement without being able to do the basics first.
Nice, nice. So, um, this is probably a like kind of stupid question, but like, how long did it take for you to like categorize? It's like seven movement pattern. How long for you to take? Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny is way back when I first started teaching physical education, so this would have been back in the later 80s. I was always big on movement with my kids. I was big on gymnastics, and I was big on, locomotion and skipping and galloping and lateral movement and all that. So I always did them. But once I got into the world of consulting, I knew I needed to categorize things just for simplicity. So I could say to you, hey, Eric, why don't you do the seven patterns with your athletes? And you'll say, okay, I know what that means. But if I say that to people who, have no idea, they're like, well, what is that? What is the seven? So I started to put them into a category of just one quick phrase, seven patterns. And now people know what those are. If I were to say, hey, 5 or 6 strength movement patterns, they would know squat, bend, push, pull, vertical, all that stuff. So that's why I did it. And it was back when I was a teacher, and I just gradually over time started to say, well, I better have a better way to say it quickly to people. And that's when it came about.
Cool, cool. Another stupid question is like, so this like seven movement pattern came from like when you were teaching PE,
Yeah.
like go through all those years of like training, consulting. Did this ever change?
Did the seven patterns ever
Yeah,
change?
yeah, yeah.
I don't know that the seven patterns change. Well, actually, they did. They did. Because I used to have more patterns that were kind of similar, like a gallop. I used to do, but then I said, I don't need the gallop in there. I can keep that in kind of the shuffle pattern world. It's because it's similar. It's just forward because it's still the gait cycle of a shuffle, and I can add that as a variation. And I used to have um, the different types of back pedals, and then I said, no, that makes it too complicated. Let me, because I have an extended back pedal. We have a more of a condensed or a shorter version of a back pedal when we squat down a little more. And I erased those, and I said, I'm just going to put them all in the back pedal, and then we can add variation later. So yeah, I kind of did have a lot, but they all still fell under seven patterns, but I was adding kind of a little bit too much to it. So yeah.
Nice, nice. Um, so besides the seven moon pattern, the first thing I want to ask is probably about plyo, or you could say jump. Um, when people teach plyo, like I recently see a lot like when they land, the foot is so wide, the the knee go inwards. I'm like, I don't know, does that make sense to you? So I was kind of thinking that what exactly is it like? Is there any like right position or like how do we teach landing?
Yeah, yeah. Again, so if we go back to the very seventh pattern of the seven patterns, it would be jumping and landing techniques. And that goes from 2 feet, 1 foot, same foot, and opposite foot. So when we're trying to produce force or accept force, which is landing, accept is landing, we have to consider where is the force coming from. So it's gravity pushing me down plus my body weight plus usually in athletics we're going to have another movement after the landing. But when we're just breaking it down and teaching, we can land and stop. So if I can align my foot position, my footprint underneath where the most mass is coming from, I'm safer when it comes to aligning my joints and allowing the tissues that support and move those joints to be effective. Okay. So if the wider I go outside my hips, because my legs, my femur drops under my hips, the wider I go, the less I'm dissipating those vertical forces straight through my joint system, and the more I'm taking on like some stability demands, right? What happens though, and here's kind of the tricky part, when we absorb, or even when I run, walk, jog, run, sprint, whatever, when my foot touches the ground, it usually comes from the outside, it rolls flat, and then it pronates to the middle. So we supinate a little bit, we violently go flat, and then we get a little bit of pronation. So certain athletes, when they do that, you're going to see the knees come inward a little bit. That's okay. That is a loading aspect, which turns the hips on and say, hey, I need help down here. The hips turn on, stop my femur from moving in. And so that's a healthy thing. Where we get in trouble, Eric, is if my feet are way outside my hips and I do that same thing with a lot of mass coming down, and all of a sudden my knees travel a long ways inside. Not saying that we can't help stabilize that, but the risk if I'm off balance, if my body tilts to one direction over one leg, that creates a greater pronation action on that leg. So if I'm landing and I tilt my body to the right, that right leg collapses even more. If we're not ready for it and our coordination isn't really good of the muscles firing, the firing system, that's when we get hurt a lot. So to me, let's teach it the fundamentals. Let's land underneath our mass first, and then the sport, let's take like a volleyball player blocking a middle. Well, all of a sudden they have to move and block to the outside. Well, when they land, sometimes their foot will naturally land a little bit wider to move them that way. And because they're creating quick force into the ground, there's that kinetic energy that kind of stabilizes them really, really quick. And then they can move to the side. But that comes later. That comes as we've taught the foundation of landing first. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, of course, because when I watch like someone coach that, like coaching plyo, and the feet is so wide, the knee travel, I'm like, that doesn't look safe to me.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So besides like I know like besides jump, when you teach back pedal, you also teach like the feet should be like hip width. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's going to be roughly hip width. Could be a little wider depending on the athlete or the position they play because of their movements. But yeah, it's just quicker that way.
Why is it quicker?
Well, so if the wider I go, if we look at an A frame, the more narrow it is, what happens is those moving parts, those legs, when they're moving, they're not having to stabilize my body tilting side to side. So if my foot is, let's say my right foot is way outside my right shoulder when I backpedal, well, it's probably going to cause me to shift to the left, then I shift to the right, then I shift to the left because my feet are so wide. But if it's narrow, it's just very efficient, very quick, and I don't have to worry about counterbalancing where my body's leaning.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm asking like some stupid
No,
question. It's
they're
like,
not. These are great. And these are the types of questions that people miss. So these are actually really, really good
yeah,
questions.
because like I'll say like this after like I go to different places, coach at different country. Like
Hmm.
I feel like nowadays people are like losing these like basic like concept of basic understanding of movement. So I w- so that's probably the main reason I want you to wanted to invite you again because like you're so good at like teaching these basic concepts and it just makes sense.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're spot on. What's happening is, so we could say even 30 years ago, 20 years ago maybe, we we didn't know as much as we know now, but we were really good at fundamentals. We stuck to the basics because that's what we knew. Now, especially with social media, it's it's fun to show all the higher level variations and fancy stuff that maybe only 5% of the population will ever do, but we put it out there, and the little 9, 10, 11, 12 year olds start doing the advanced stuff, but they can't do the basics. So the fact that you're asking this question is should help a lot of coaches start to understand, listen, if you just got your athletes really good at these basic movements, so if you took these 7 patterns and then added the ability to reaccelerate out of these, change directions out of those 7, and then added the ability to rotate our bodies, like what I call my 180 series. And if we just did those, gosh, you're going to have a lot of really good moving athletes. And anyway, the sport kind of dictates how you move anyway. So if you and I played volleyball a lot, we would move differently than a rugby athlete or a tennis athlete's even going to be different than so the sport kind of drives it. Our job, let's give you the tools to do the specific stuff. So let's stay basic and get the fundamentals down first.
Nice, nice, nice. So I'm gonna dive a little bit deeper into this since we talk about like jumping, we talk about the hip, like backpedal or decel, we talk about the hip. I know I messaged you about this before, but like still, when we do linear sprinting, it's actually one side doing pushing, the other side probably doing pulling. Am I
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
when
So
it
yeah,
yeah, so when it comes like change of direction, like shuffle, is it the same? Like one side's pushing, the other side's pulling?
yeah. So good. Look at this. So if you look, so when we walk, run, jog, sprint, accelerate, each leg has the responsibility of the front side of the body and the back side of the body. Okay. But when we laterally shuffle, my legs don't switch sides. So if I'm shuffling to my left, my right leg pushes. When it finishes its extension, it pushed all the way, my leg straightened out. It coils back in and it prepares to push again, and it meets underneath my hips to a degree. The front leg's job is to continue the work the back leg did. So the front leg's job isn't to be the primary mover, it's a support system for the back leg. So I push, as I'm pushing, I'm separating the front leg, and then when I'm done pushing, I pull. And then the back leg recovers and they meet in the middle, and it repeats itself. The best way I can explain it for those who have swam and done the side stroke. When I'm on my side, my close arm pulls me, pushes the water, and then I reach and I pull with the front, and then my other arm comes back in, and I push and I pull. The legs do that, and they never cross each other really. They pretty much stay the same side. So we have a push, a pull, a recover, and then a repeat. And that's the cool thing with the lateral gait cycle. It's each leg has its own job to do.
Nice. So is it the same with lateral run?
Lateral run has a mixture of both, but it's more along the lines of sprinting or accelerating, because now what happens is my back leg pushes. So anytime I break down the shuffle and the lateral run, the first third, I would say, to first half of the movement is identical. We push with the back leg, we open the front leg, and we start getting prepared to take over with the front leg. Okay, now the lateral run, what happens is I push, the front leg opens, and it's ready to take over. The difference between the shuffle and the lateral run is in the shuffle, my lower leg, so my shin will cast forward out in front, my heel will pull, and that helps me move. But if it's a lateral run, my lower leg does not cast out. It actually goes under, just like I would be coming out of the blocks as a sprinter. So it drives down and back. My pelvis opens up in the direction I'm going to go a little bit and allows my back leg to clear and come across my body. And then I start kind of the running gait. The difference is my upper body stays oriented in the direction of the ball or the opponent or whatever it is. So it kind of have it. Some people call it a crossover. I don't call it a crossover simply because I don't want them to think that you actually keep one foot straight and you cross the other. You don't. You open the hips and you allow yourself to run through.
Nice, nice. So, um, you know what amazed me is like I think no, it's like 3 years ago. I think it's 3 years ago when I
Mhm.
first like know the seven movement pattern. I was like, okay, this is easy. It's like, okay, and like you really categorize if you really look at how athletes move. Yeah, it is like the seven movement pattern. But
Yeah.
like after like probably 2 or 3 years, I get more experience with training athletes. Then you look at like how they land, what is the gait cycle and the hip. And I message you and I ask you about this stuff. It also like falls into like the seven movement patterns. It's like and like
Yeah.
all those knowledge you have like just fit in. That's like amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's years and years of watching. I think what helped me, Eric, is when I first started, we didn't have social media, so I couldn't just type in YouTube and look at a bunch of videos and kind of cheat my way through it by watching. What I did is I just watched athletes move. I was fortunate to be a coach of many sports, but I also when in 1991 I was at a tennis academy, and so I watched and I studied their movement just with my eyes. I didn't get extra video. I just would watch and watch and watch. And then of course, I spent a lot of time in basketball, and I've done a lot of volleyball and baseball, and I just kept watching, and I realized how similar all athletes move. It's just the sport drives the specificity of how we move, based on the task of the sport. So it's really cool.
Nice, nice. So after like the seven movement pattern, I want to ask like probably some coaches say this is a stupid question, but I find it like difficult to understand. Um when when we look at like textbooks teach about sprinting or like max velocity,
Yeah,
they're gonna say we do dorsiflexion. But a few days ago when I look at like Ralph Mann's book said
yeah,
when you do max velocity, you actually need like little plantar flexion. But
right.
then people's gonna say like plantar flexion is uh decelerating. So I watch like how I sprint. I've been training like sprinting myself.
Good.
So I've been watch how I sprint and like there's at max velocity, there's actually a little bit of plantar flexion.
Yep.
I'm not sure. So why exactly is that?
Yep. This is again really critical to understand this because I have said for a long time, I think we overcoach dorsiflexion in many areas of movement. Dorsiflexion is important, but it's also a reflexive state to movement. So we'll reflexively go into dorsiflexion a lot. Now, if you have an athlete that doesn't, I worked with many gymnasts who became sprinters or jumpers for me in track, and they tend to point a lot because the sport in gymnastics requires them to point, right? So they plantar flex. So here's the thing, when you're sprinting, the reason you need slight plantar flexion is because of what we said a little while ago, where when the foot lands, it lands on the upper part of the foot, but the outer part. So the upper third part of the foot, but the out part hits first. So think about this. If I'm in a pretty aggressive dorsiflexion and I'm coming through the gait cycle, what would happen is I would probably land close to on my heel, but underneath my hips, which is really tough to do. And I'd be more almost completely flat footed. What happens is when you dorsiflex, your limb is shorter, right? Because when I point my toes, that makes me taller because it raises me up in the air. So if I have a little bit of that, that allows me to strike just a small, if you look at a side view of a sprinter, their foot lands just in front of their center of mass. It doesn't land directly underneath because you're going too fast. Wouldn't be able to keep up with your body moving. But the shin is vertical. And the shin gets vertical when the foot is just a few inches out in front of the center of mass. Well, to do that, there has to be a slight unlocking of the ankle and it'll point a little bit. Well, but that, remember this, we talked about this. This allows me to go from supination to kind of a flat foot to a pronation, and then I toe off, and then I push off and I go. So even though we like an acceleration, dorsiflexion is important because it pulls my leg through really quick versus leaving my foot pointed like plantar flex. But in sprinting, we do need a little bit of plantar flexion before we ground contact. Otherwise, we're going to land very awkward at those maximal speeds, and we just wouldn't be able to do it.
Cool. So another like difficult question. I'm not trying to put you in like a hard position to answer
No,
this,
no,
but there's like debate about it. Like debate from I don't know, like France Bosch is gonna say it different, like different coaches gonna say it different. I'm not gonna put you on a hard spot to answer it,
no,
but like
no, that's fine.
uh how about when it comes to like long jump or high jump for the penultimate step?
Yep. Yep. You're talking about how it lands, how we
Yeah,
land.
yeah, on the
Yep.
penultimate step and
Yep.
takeoff limb.
Yep. So what's this is one of the things that I did to help myself learn things, as I always said, okay, what's the task? What's the ultimate goal? If I were to perform this really well, what am I having to do to make this work? So if I need to jump far and or high, there's going to be obviously an element of height. I'm going to have to get off the ground and I have to go up in the air so my momentum can carry me through space. Okay, now the high jump, taking that to the ultimate. I'm really trying to get high, as with a long jump. The goal is to get as long as I can, but if I don't get in the air, it's not going to work. Okay, so what does that mean in terms of foot contact? At some point, my penultimate step, the step before the final takeoff, is going to set me up to lower my center of mass a little bit to allow me to have a greater elastic response to lift, to elevate, to go up in the air. So if I'm doing the long jump, don't want the foot too far in front of me because I still have to run over it and go long, but it's got to get in front of me a little bit. And you're going to land anywhere from a little bit on the heel first to a flat foot to some athletes are pretty good at getting close to a flat foot right off. But if I were to land just on the ball of my foot to take off in a long jump, you're probably not going to take off as well because you're not going to get the elevation. Same with the high jump. The difference with the high jump is we're actually angulating our body, and I'm coming in with that outside foot on an angle. So I'm fighting not only the penultimate step, but centrifugal forces that are trying to pull me into the mat that I'm jumping on. So that foot has to come out in front of me to decelerate my forward momentum a little bit to get me to go vertical. So there's going to have to be some heel contact. Then I roll to the foot, and then the back leg coming through and driving up and across my body. That's what helps me get up and then corkscrew into a backwards landing. So penultimate step sets me up to be able to accomplish the task. If you want to go in between, Eric, the long jump and the high jump, we have like a layup in basketball because you're going to get a little bit of both. You're going to get some length, but you're going to get some height, but you're not trying to go way up like you're on a high jump, and you're not trying to go super, super far on a long jump. So you kind of get that mix. But I study a lot of takeoffs for layups and dunks and stuff like that. And that's really the action you want. And you don't want too much knee bend. It's that the angle is this way with the knee bend, and that gives me that quick trigger. It's like elastic. If I bend too much, now it's power, and power is a little bit too slow. I can't quite take off like I can. And that's the reason we get the leg in front of us. That allows me to keep the knee from bending too much.
Cool. So it's actually uh you need a dorsiflex heel contact first so you can transfer the force to vertical. Right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because what'll happen if I land with a plantar flexed foot, pretty much out straight, what's going to happen is it's really hard for me to use that kinetic energy and that joint position to roll my body over that foot. Even though it's a little bit, I got to get over it. But if I'm dorsiflex, the heel touches and then I roll to the ground as my leg's coming over it, then I get the pre-stretch, then I go. But if I land like this, I have nothing left. It's very difficult to do it. And it's probably kind of dangerous, probably would hurt your foot if you came in with your foot at a large degree of plantar flexion. So yeah, you need that a little bit. It's just like decelerating to change directions.
How many hours exactly did you watch people move? Like, how did you get that?
What's funny is over the years, I've been fortunate enough to work with and consult with a lot of different sports. So anytime I was asked to do that, I would spend a lot of time studying film, from boxers, how they move, to martial artists, to skiers, to, you know, I worked with team handball athletes. And so what I would do, Eric, is I just spend a lot of time watching different athletes move in those sports to accomplish the task that they have to. So I was a jumper myself in high school. I high jumped, I was a long jump, and I did some triple. And I was also, I was a hurdler, and so I came out of blocks. So as I got older, I started to study it because I trained those athletes as well. So I would just watch a lot of film, and I didn't predetermine anything. I just said, I'm going to let the film tell me what I'm seeing. What is it that's actually happening? And then I watched and I watched, and then I watched the best athletes do it. And I said, there it is. That's what I was looking for right there. And that's kind of how I've always learned and taught myself how to be able to coach it.
Cool, cool, cool. So last part of the podcast, I want to ask so people can hate me, but so there's like force plates, there's like 3D motion captures, there's like 1080, whatever. So I personally find it like it's a very useful tool, but when it comes like looking how I'll put it this way. Do you think that what is the most important thing when like comes to coaching athlete? did the numbers dictate what we do, or like what we see dictate what we do?
Yeah, yeah, that's good. So I don't think you can be wrong if you're using analytics. If you're using numbers, I think it certainly can help. But having said that, we have to understand usually when you're gathering data, except when you put somebody on like if you have your athletes have a wearable and they go through a practice and we gather data from that, that's real data because they're in practice and they're moving. But if we're talking about mechanically and force production, and we're watching them, what we have to understand is what we see off a force plate or what we see off a jump mat or we see off the 3D analytics type stuff. Usually it's a rehearsed pattern. But what happens in athletics is an athlete does an aggressive movement not with thought, but with the intent to make a play somewhere else. So they're creating force on different angles with different foot positions to accomplish a task. My eyes usually can tell me what it is that they should have done or how they should have, produced that force because I understand the task they were trying to accomplish. I don't know that a force plate can tell me that. The force plate can tell me, hey, there's an asymmetry between the right side and the left side, or um, this this athlete that plays in this position is substandard from the norm of athletes. Maybe they're not producing enough force to play that position. The numbers can tell me that. But in terms of the mechanics of how to move better, I use the analytics just as an addition to, but I have been very fortunate over the years to be able to see things really well. And I can tell if they're producing the force that I need them to produce just by how they perform. And at the end of the day, I think sometimes we get so caught up on the numbers, we forget to be a coach. And we forget that the real world is going to get involved. And we have to sometimes a lesser number based on analytics, but with great capacity to do that repeatedly, sometimes that's better. That keeps us healthy. And that makes sure we're doing it really well. So I think we have to be careful of certain numbers and reaching numbers. We got to look at performance and let that tell us, hey, this athlete's nailing it. They're doing great. They're never injured. They're always quick. They're always first to the ball or they're first, to make a move. But yeah, if we test them in the lab, there might be middle of the pack. Well, I'll take the guy who performs well on the field any day, and that's safe. So yeah,
Yeah, I love this. I love this. So that's probably all I have for you today. So
great.
I'm sorry to put you into hard position to answer like those like very hard critical questions, but thank you.
Thank
And
you.
for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, for those who are interested in the seven movement patterns, where can they find you?
Yeah, if they go anywhere on social media, if they go to YouTube and just literally put in Lee Taft 7 movement patterns, they'll actually get videos on all of them and they can see everything. They can see what we're talking about. But if they go to leetaft.com, they can pretty much find, what we're doing from there. And yeah, so I'm pretty active. I try to answer people's questions to keep us growing in this field. And I learn. I learn every time I get questions. So appreciate what you're doing, Eric. This was great.
Thank you.